You're live.
Okay. Hi, I'm Trish from Honey Pies Recipes, and we're here today to answer a question that was asked yesterday from Good Day Farm. It's when using cornstarch as a thickener, how do you know how much to make? As in, how much cornstarch and water is needed for X cups of liquid to be thickened? Same question for using a roux. It's a really good question, but there is no standard ratio because it really depends on what you're going to make. And I'll give you a couple examples. Cornstarch and water is called a slurry. It's a thickening agent. And what you do is you just take a tablespoon of cornstarch, 2 tablespoons of water, mix it together. Do not use hot water because the hot water will instantly make the cornstarch coagulate and it'll turn into all kinds of lumpy things. So it has to be dissolved in cold water before you put it into a hot liquid. So let's use 2 examples of using 1 tablespoon of cornstarch to thicken cherry pie filling. So I would put 1 tablespoon of cornstarch into 2 tablespoons of water, dissolve that. Then I've got my cherries and my cherry juice in a pan on the stove, which is hot, and I'm going to pour that in. There's only about 1, maybe 1 1/4 cup of liquid in the cherries in the pot. And that 1 tablespoon of the cornstarch is going to set that so it's more like a gel. Not stiff, but when I cut my pie, I don't want those cherries just oozing all over. So that will set that amount of liquid up for a nice pie. On the other hand, if I wanted to thicken a soup and say it had 6 to 8 cups, I may use 2 tablespoons of the cornstarch with 2 to 3 tablespoons of water to dissolve that and then put it in. What I'm looking for there is a mouthfeel, something that is a little bit more than that watery texture, but not pasty. So that would be that ratio there. The same thing you would ask for a roux. A roux is usually used primarily for sauces, maybe to thicken gravy. So with gravy, you're going to use less. So you would need to use maybe 1 tablespoon of butter, 1 tablespoon of flour. You can do it by weight also, 1 ounce to 1 ounce. It's always a 1-to-1 ratio with flour and butter for making a roux. Melt your butter, put in your flour, and then start adding your liquid. So for example, if I were making macaroni and cheese, let's see, my recipe calls for 4 cups of milk, and I use 2 tablespoons of flour and 2 tablespoons of butter. And that makes a very nice, unctuous sort of milky, thick base. And then you put in your cheese and melt that. But it's still quite runny. If you're going to do a gravy, you want a lot less. And frankly, for a gravy, I like to use the cornstarch slurry because you can then just pour a little bit of that slurry in, thicken, and if it's not as the texture that you want, just a little bit more. Where with the roux, all of the starch is already in your thickener. The 2 differences between the cornstarch and the slurry are color. The slurry with the cornstarch stays translucent, which is perfect for my cherry pie because the vibrance of the red stays. It's not toned down at all by flour. And with a nice gravy, you still get more of that rich au jus look, but it has a better texture. Where when you make a standard gravy with a roux, it starts to turn a little opaque and becomes more beige. So it's really the quantity of the starch to the water or the liquid, because it could be stock, just really depends on what you're trying to achieve and what the thickness is. And with roux, there's a light, there's a beige, and there's a dark. The longer that you cook your roux, especially if you're doing something like a Creole where you want a dark roux, that you would use more flour because as you continue to cook the starches break down, and so it loses its ability to thicken. So there's a lot of caveats there. I wish I could be more helpful. I would say less is better because you don't want to end up with something that is really pasty. And any good recipe, unless you're trying to develop something on your own, should have the right amount. And if you're trying to make up a recipe on your own, look up similar types of recipes online and see what they're using for the amount of flour and butter to the amount of liquid that they're putting in, and maybe that'll give you a better guideline. I hope that helps you. Thanks for the question, and we'll see you later. Thanks.